Welcome to Reflections on Identity, a podcast series exploring educators' narratives on their professional identity. Today, we're talking to William Sharp, a training and supervising psychoanalyst and university academic. William, welcome. Could you tell us a little bit about your role?
Sure. I'm happy to be here, so thank you for inviting me. And I was thinking of the history of how I got to where I was, and I actually started as an educator. So I taught. I live in the United States and have been up and down the East Coast, but started in Philadelphia and New Jersey as a high school or secondary school social studies teacher, teaching mostly world civilizations at the time. And it got me really interested because I thought I was a good teacher, as much as anybody who I think is starting out considers themselves to be a good teacher. And I thought I was a good teacher, but that some students were still not learning. And so I would really get curious about that and thought, I want to kind of work with Johnny or Jane to understand what's going on. And so at the time, I thought, oh, I'm going to get a master's in school psychology. And so pursued a master's in school psychology part-time while teaching during the day. Halfway through that program, realized, okay, school psychologists do a lot of testing, a lot of writing up of evaluations, meeting with teachers, signing forms, running meetings. And I decided that is not what I wanted to do. And I finished the program because I was halfway through it. And I liked the language of school psychology and knowing that aspect of the educational background, but I didn't see myself in that role or identity. So then chose a degree, a master's in counseling, which here in Massachusetts, which is where I was at the time, I got a master's in counseling that led to a licensed mental health counselor position where I could then meet with Johnny and Jane on a weekly basis. That moved me out of teaching into private practice. And I still do maintain a private practice here in Boston, Mass. And then I started being asked to come in and speak to classes, specifically at Northeastern University, which is where I do currently teach. But I was asked to just come and give a talk about working with people in a private practice model. And after having done that a little bit, I had also started on a doctorate in psychoanalysis at the Boston Graduate School of Psychoanalysis. And when I graduated and became Dr. Sharp, the professor whose class I used to come in and visit once a term said, "Could you teach another section of this class?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" And so I ended up teaching one section, which then became teaching two sections. And then they said, "Well, you could be, you could have benefits and be a full-time instructor if you pick up another class each semester." So I went ahead and did that. And so shifted, interestingly, back to the teaching role. But I would say as a very different teacher in the 2010s than I was in the 1990s as a high school teacher, and maintained my private practice in Brookline. So I have multiple hats that I wear, but all that's to say, at the moment, I teach at Northeastern University full time. I have my private practice. I also, as you said in the intro, I'm a training and supervising analyst at the Boston Graduate School of Psychoanalysis, where I also teach, usually one class a semester as well. So I tend to be very busy. So you're getting me at a good time, 9 in the morning. I'm not exhausted yet.
Great.
What I wanted to ask William was, you've obviously got this rich range of roles and sort of responsibilities. How important do you think professional identity is to you as part of navigating those roles, or is it something that's on the periphery or subliminal? I mean, where do you perceive your own sort of identity and the importance of it?
It's it's um it's an interesting question because I feel in a lot of ways I have one unified identity, right? I have one way of thinking of myself. And if I had to label it, this is going to sound a bit haughty, but there's an element of being like a maturational agent. I like working with people to help them achieve the potential and go, well, first off, for many, figure out what they want, figure out how to get it and what's going to get in the way. That's kind of a stripped down version, but I think I do that in my private practice. I do that with the future counselors that I'm teaching, but I also, with my undergraduates, really want them to think about what they want and where they're going in a way that any 19 or 20-year-old can possibly know what they want. So that's kind of a unified identity. But there are moments, in my day where I think I'm putting on different professional hats and where, I'm definitely in the therapist role when I'm in my private practice. And, I try to not do too much psychoeducation because it's not really what an analyst does. I'm trying not to tell people right or wrong or give advice. I'm really just helping them explore what's going on and trying to understand. I'm trying to understand them so that they can also understand themselves. And when I'm in the classroom, I do remember, okay, I am not in a 75 person lecture class. I am not their therapist. That was a great question they asked, but I'm not going to take it down the therapeutic route. I'm going to keep it my role as an educator, but still with that hint of psychoanalyst in there where I want them to reflect. I want them, I think of my teaching style, even in a lecture class, as much of a discussion as possible. I don't want to be in an identity or a role where I'm just talking and depositing information. I want connection going both ways.
And how does the supervision and training role of the your psychoanalytic work, how does that work? Are you a mentor when you're doing that, or is it something more prescriptive or less prescriptive? In terms of that sort of psychoanalytic role, working with other trainee psychoanalysts, how do you sort of position yourself in relation to them?
Um, I think I learn as much from them as they may learn from me. Because I think the biggest thing from in a psychoanalytic role, what I'm trying to teach is for them to be curious and open and not to know answers, even though probably for many of them up until this point, they have been told like you should know what you're doing, you have to have answers, you have to have these skills, these are the program learning outcomes, this is where you're supposed to be. Those things are all important, but what I get curious about is their being curious and then what gets in their way of being curious. Because very often in their growing professional identity, they have to know they have some maybe unexplored areas of their characters that are going to get in the way when they're in the treatment room working with their patients. So I really see it as a parallel process where I, as much as possible, am demonstrating open curiosity so that they in turn can be open and curious with their patients, who then in turn can be open and curious in their own lives.
Yeah.
Because, there's not a lot we can do to change some things, and we have to accept that there are parts of ourselves that we have the most control over. So if we can be open and curious and non-defensive about that, that's good. But it's hard because, I can feel my supervisees defensiveness click on sometimes if I say something in the wrong way. I can feel my own defensiveness come on and I maybe make it concrete with an example. One thing I notice is somebody will present a case to me, supervisor, you'll present a case, and I'll ask a question about, oh, have you thought about asking this particular question? And then they jump to, oh, well, I did ask that question and da 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 da. And there's a part of me that knows, no, they didn't ask that question. You just thought that they should have, and that I'm now criticizing them and that they need to change their answer. And it's, I really am striving for like, no, it's okay. You didn't ask it. What was it maybe though in the moment that made you not think about it? Because very often it's a feeling that it is subjective. So it might be their own sticking point and subjective countertransference, but it's also probably something about the case. That's like an emotional contagion or an induction. So something in the case might be this. And so any kind of, quote unquote mistake or enactment is super important to learn. And certainly from a psychoanalytic standpoint, if we didn't have enactments and transferences and resistances, I don't know that we'd have psychoanalysis because it really, things are supposed to get murky and confused.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you've probably already alluded to this to a greater extent, William, but do you see any kind of barriers to or challenges around your own professional identity, be it in the consulting room, the psychoanalytic institute, or the university classroom? Are there any factors that challenge your conceptions of your professional identity and that you have to either work with or resist or work around in any shape or form?
Um, you know, A simple answer might be, knowing boundaries and in a clinical way, thinking of scope of practice, right? Like, what is it that I'm supposed to do? But I can give an example from just this week. I was lecturing, I had just introduced classic psychoanalytic theories of personality and, had to present on Freud's classic psychosexual stages to a group of undergraduates in a university setting where in the United States we have laws about discrimination and how things have to be presented and that students shouldn't be made to feel too uncomfortable. And so, I learned from one of my mentors, I start the lecture by saying, look, I didn't write the curriculum, I'm just teaching it. We're going to talk about an anal stage, we're going to talk about an oral stage, we're going to talk about a phallic stage. And I do it in a way that, I'm prefacing like, okay, this you might feel uncomfortable with this, but we have to do it because I do believe learning has to be uncomfortable. But there is that kind of fine line of how do you get somebody to be a little bit uncomfortable and learn something that they don't know, but also not get yourself fired for saying the wrong thing, especially when, there are certainly a lot of people who could read classic Freudian psychoanalytic technique as, cis normative, heteronormative types of stuff. Luckily, I'm trained as a modern psychoanalyst, and I think we've kind of addressed a lot of that in a better way. So I'll say things like, I don't think Freud would know what a lot of psychoanalysis is today in the same way that the Wright brothers wouldn't know what a plane is today, because it's evolved since the original idea. But as a former history teacher, I think you got to know the history. You got to know the context in which all this stuff was presented.
And what role do you think collaboration plays in any of the facets that you work in or have worked in William? What role does working with others have in terms of how you perceive yourself as an educator and as an academic?
I think you know, getting out there, and again, the idea that I'm not going to know everything, or I'm not even going to necessarily have the one singular best view of things. I'm trained in a specific mode of thinking, so modern psychoanalysis is a drive theory, which is kind of rare. There's a lot more object relations and relational psychoanalysts out there. So when I'm doing these things, I try as much as possible to invite other people into my classes. So at the Boston Graduate School of Psychoanalysis, I'm currently teaching a course on adolescence, which is such an interesting, beginning of a whole different identity and second individuation process, depending on who you're talking to about it. But I have, the next 3 weeks, I have some different speakers coming in. I have a very senior psychoanalyst coming in to talk about the brain development. I have a woman, another psychoanalyst, but whose interest is in gender and sexuality, and she's going to talk about internet stuff and porn numbers, that kind of thing. Um, and I think, and just to kind of show the diversity, I also have somebody coming in who's going to run a Dungeons and Dragon one-shot campaign with them to engage in kind of a playful way of thinking about, a subset of adolescents. And I do that because I don't think I have everything that I can provide. And if I want to give a full picture, I want everybody to have it. It's another reason why, Neil and I know each other through a study abroad program that I run through the Undergraduate Institute at Northeastern. And I bring 25 students to London to kind of study in London, but also I think unless you're outside of the culture that you're steeped in, you don't even know the culture that you're steeped, right? You have to be somewhere else to have a comparison to go back to. So it's disorienting, it's uncomfortable again, it's new. Students love it, but we go and do multiple visits to the Freud Museum in Hampstead Heath, and we go to hear some relational psychoanalytic speakers, and we hear from you and David about identity. Um, and so it's, I think there has to be collaboration so that you get a balanced view and so that students can begin to take what they want to learn and to know. And I would say it even extends to the clinical because I do think there are some advantages. I've worked with the same supervisor somehow, I think now at this point, almost 22 years. And I love that she knows me. She knows my blind spots. She's still working on them. bless. And, she's really attuned to that. But I've also, hit other supervisors for short periods of time, done some just to get different perspectives. And I feel like my voice, both as an educator and as a supervisor, and probably also as a therapist, comes from how I've integrated and worked with the different pieces that I like from different supervisors and trainers and mentors.
I mean, that's sort of a lovely kind of encapsulation of it, I think. This whole idea of, working with others for your own sort of professional growth. William, that you've covered so much there in such a rich way in a relatively short space of time. Carol, have you got anything else you want to sort of pick up on from what William has said?
No questions. I think I think we got a real taste of your thoughts on this. I do think you mentioned some very interesting ideas about division in roles and that difference between integrating roles, but also sometimes having to wear very different hats and knowing where the boundaries are in those. And I love the idea of, unless I misheard this, the maturational agent. I think that's a great term in terms of identity and how you see that role. And it says it all, really, doesn't it? It's I thought that was quite an interesting label. But overall, no, I really enjoyed listening to that. It was fascinating.
I actually I had given a talk co-presented at a group therapy conference, and she and I talked about it and came up with the idea. I think it was in a reading we were using that used the term maturational agent. I believe it was Hyman Spotnitz. And so we put it on the back of our t-shirt and wore the t-shirt to the conference. So other people had volunteer or ask me, and she and I were just walking around with this t-shirt that said maturational agent on the back. So it is one of my favorite ways of thinking about the work.
Oh, that's brilliant.
We all need a maturational agent to work with us, don't we? At whatever age. Thank you. That's great. You have been listening to Reflections on Identity. We hope you can join us for the next episode in our series. We'd love to hear from you, so please put your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to be notified of the next episode, click the bell icon or follow. Bye for now.